Well, Werner, it's good to be with you again. It's been a while since we've had a conversation on the air.
Yeah, I'm excited about being here, Michael.
I think probably a good place to start, Werner, is just I think many people, and some perhaps aren't, but many people out there listening may know that you've been involved very much in auto racing of late. And I think people would be interested in what that experience has been for you and why on earth did you get involved in auto racing?
Well, I'm glad that you asked the question later in the game rather than earlier, because it was more difficult to talk about it since the results hadn't kind of shown up as yet. But the real purpose and what the whole project started with was some observations. One of the observations was that really fine, capable, able, committed people who would work with great sincerity, great ability, and great integrity still did not seem to be enough to turn it around for people, so that it still is not true that people's birthright is to be enlightened, to have their lives work. It's like if you get very fortunate, if you get a real break, then perhaps you're going to experience being fulfilled in life. But for the most part, it's something that's a difficult path, an unusual path. Getting to the end of the path is unusual for most of us, for the vast majority of people on the planet. And so what I saw was that there was this incredible opportunity in front of us to have the world work for everybody with nobody left out, nothing left out, and that whatever way we were was insufficient to that opportunity. We had this great opportunity, and indeed it is the greatest opportunity. And yet, even as wonderful as many people are, and as wonderful as the things which people have done are, it didn't seem to really make a difference. So I wanted to try to find out what was the communication that would allow people to realize within themselves the qualities which they need to be in touch with in order to fulfill that opportunity to make the world work for everyone. And I decided that the way to go about discovering that was in a research project. And I guess borrowing from some of the things that John Lilly and other researchers have said, I realized that the researcher was going to have to do the experiment on himself in this case. And so I looked for things that were so far beyond me and so far out of my reach that I would have to go through all of the stages with respect to them. And I tried things all the way from skydiving to scuba diving and things in between. I considered going to a university and joining a department in a university to study the question. I thought about going into a monastery to contemplate the question. And I decided that what would work best was to set up a research situation. And so I tried these various disciplines, as I say, and I finally came on auto racing, which I thought had the qualities to support a research. First off, the feedback was instantaneous. It was for real. There was no kidding about it. Also, it had four qualities, Michael, which I thought made it eminently suitable for research on making a difference in life. One of the qualities was that it's absolutely a function of teamwork. No one single individual on the team can produce a winning race team or winning race. And it requires literally a team effort. It's not just everybody does their part. The team must be successful in order for you to be successful in auto racing. Secondly, it has the circumstance, as life does. Things which look to be out of your control. You can have a 25-cent part break on an automobile and lose a race as a function of that. So, as in life, you have to master the circumstances. Just as with teamwork, I think in order to really make a difference in life, you need to be able to work with other people. And then the third quality was the fact that the race car that I drove was a single-seat race car. In other words, it came down to a personal responsibility, as I think it does in life. And then the fourth and final quality was that there were opposing forces. There are other people on the track who are trying to beat you. As a matter of fact, in some cases, trying to put you off the track. And I think that in life, while they may not necessarily be construed as opposing forces, they're at least alternative forces, other things you need to deal with, diversions and so forth. And I really liked those qualities of auto racing. And I chose it because of those qualities, because I thought it did model accurately the situation which I was attempting to research, and it was good for research because of the things I said, like immediate feedback, dead honesty. You know, you can't give the car any excuses. I mean, it just doesn't listen to excuses or reasons or rationalizations. And the other thing I liked about it, Michael, was that it's down and dirty. It's kind of, lifestyle. It's not idealized. You have to deal with the real life situation. And that was where it began. And I was very excited about the beginning of it. And as I got into it, and I made a commitment to it, and I made a commitment to win. I thought, well, I could go in and say I'll do the best I can, but that wouldn't have made honest research. So we made a commitment not really to do the best we could, but to win as a way of keeping the integrity in the research. And I want you to know that my excitement and enthusiasm for it dwindled because it got to be really, really tough. I mean, really hard. And for most of the past year, I have been way over my head in truly a desperate situation. I tried to tell one of the people who was making the film, we documented the whole process on film as well as tape and in writing, as a matter of fact, in some cases. But anyway, I was trying to tell one of the producer of the documentary that it's really desperate out there. You know, people said, well, aren't you really doing it because it's fun? It's fun to drive a car at about 8/10. At about 9/10, you're really too busy to notice whether it's any fun or not. At 10/10, it's nothing. I mean, it's just you and the car. And in order to win, you've got to drive the car at 11/10. That's just a different world. It's not a world in which the ordinary questions of motivation apply anymore. You can ask the questions about the motivation for getting into the car, but once you get to driving the car, the ordinary questions about motivation disappear.
So you really have to perhaps go beyond normalcy to drive a race car and win.
Precisely, exactly, and it, it's got that exquisite quality to it, which really makes it a really very beautiful research vehicle, and I really had two objectives, Michael. One of my objectives was the one I said, was to discover the communication that would empower people, that would allow them to be in touch with those qualities within themselves which they needed to be in touch with in order to take advantage of this opportunity to make the world work for everyone. The other objective which I had in the research, it was really not a part of the research, it was a kind of a personal objective, was to break up what I was.
Break up what you were as a person?
Yes, exactly. To break up
patterns, or
to break up whatever Werner Erhard had become. And I wanted to do that, Michael, because one of the things which I've realized actually almost since the inception of EST was that in order to really provide an opportunity for transformation in the world, one needed to master organization. And one needed to discover what it was that would make an organization work.
So you're talking about having to master working with people.
Yes, but I want to be very specific about the quality of working with people, not merely mastering relationship, not merely mastering that organization which is not really an organization, but which is really a family. You know, when an organization is of a certain size, or there's that certain relationship between each of the people, it really functions as family. And when EST first started, we were really not an organization. We were a family. And we were very effective as a family. The people in the, quote, organization, which was really, as I say, a family, were really very, very effective as family. I think also sometimes there's a phenomena which I call group, which is somewhere between a family and an organization. It has more often than not a common sense of purpose, but it's people who've come together because they had a common sense of purpose, not people who were brought together for a purpose. When you get to organization, you're talking about people who are brought together for a purpose, whose personal purposes may be inconsistent with each other, in some cases even incompatible with each other. But organization is a very special level of expression of humanity. And as I see it, it's the gate to the expression of self as society. And it's self as society and self as individual that I see as the cornerstones to realizing a kind of straw that breaks the camel's back transformation. In
ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And just to kind of make this communication a little bit clearer, I see self expressing itself at various levels. For instance, I see self expressing itself as individual. I see self expressing itself as relationship. I see self-expressing itself as family, as group, as organization, as society, as institution, as culture, as God, if you will, or all of it.
So this is all the world's a mirror to merely reflect ourselves.
Yes. But I want to be very clear about the definition of self not being limited to myself as an individual. At any rate, the point is that I had not broken through and being able to communicate and to effect the insights that I had about making an organization work. And I had to conclude that was something about the way in which I was construed, the way in which I had gotten put together or put myself together. And I really had nothing to lose, since what it was that I wasn't working in this area. I didn't know what it would take to make it work. I thought I will just break up what I've got and we'll see what comes together and see if it maybe can be effective. And we've had some very exciting breakthroughs in that area. And by the way, the racing team was called Breakthrough Racing. Actually, it was called Breakthrough Racing, a research project. And it was, as I say, this research in these two areas. Actually, research in one area and a personal kind of goal in another area, but really towards another end.
Does it still exist, or is it a was?
It's a was. Breakthrough Racing exists now not as a racing team anymore, but it's finishing up the documentation of the research and completing the film and organizing itself to present its findings and share the findings. Actually, a great deal of what I'm presenting in the work I'm doing today, at this time, not this day, but at this time, came out of the work that got done all year long in this racing venture, in this research project. I don't, in the presentations which I'm doing now, refer to the racing project per se, but the insights, the spaces. And maybe I should tell you what spaces are later, unless I don't. Maybe that word's gotten into the vocabulary. But at any rate, the things that are happening in these presentations really have come out of this research. Although I don't yet relate them directly to the racing. That will happen in the film itself.
Let me go back to something you said about one of the reasons that you did the racing project. You were talking about having to deal or work with the 25-cent part breaking down. And what occurs to me is working with a flat tire as you're, going around the far turn. Does learning how to live with that and operate with that involve learning how to live with failure, not making it, not winning?
Yes. you actually hit right in the middle of the target of one of the most useful things I got out of this year. And that was that I really feel I've discovered something I can share with people in having had the experience of not winning, in fact, of literally failing in some cases. I mean, dismal failure in some cases, and still having come out of the experience enhanced and able to contribute. It's one thing, I think, to come out of a failure without being damaged. It's perhaps another level to come out of a failure having been enhanced. But what really kind of completes it for a person, Michael, is to come out having something to contribute. And one of the things you learn in racing very quickly is that there are really very fine, capable, talented people who are really every bit as good at auto racing as the people who are winning, who are not winning. And it's a really very impactful experience to be with these people on the track, to know the kind of investment, of physical investment, mental investment that they're putting into it, to watch the quality of them shine through, and to see that doesn't equal first place. And out of that, to know that there's something to contribute wherever you are in the race, that you really are valid. And it's not a matter of having to prove your validity. You are valid.
Mm-hmm. I think most of us come out of failure depressed, not enhanced.
Yes, unfortunately so, because I think that our system of reality and our system of values says that the way you measure the good guy from the bad guy, the good gal from the bad gal, is the guy up front. And this really reflects and is a bit at the heart of why life doesn't work for people. That is false. It is false that the good guy, the good gal, the good person is up front, and those behind are a bit less. The only thing you know about the winners is that they win. And the only thing you know about the losers is that they lost. But there's a difference between having lost and being a loser. And you cannot measure whether you are a winner or a loser by numbers, by where you came in the race. And it's truly pernicious to continue to foster that kind of a lie.
We have an educational system that fosters that. From in the first grade, you learn that F's failing. You don't get F's. Otherwise, you're less than the next person.
Yes, and that's really that is really the damage, Michael, is the interpretation. When one gets an F, what one ought to know is that one answered less than this number of questions out of this possible number of questions, and that's all one ought to know, because that is the extent of the facts. The rest of it is some societal, some social, some agreement in society about what it means. And I'm afraid that most of what we've agreed on in society is counterproductive. And in fact, I'm not even afraid of it. I have the absolute proof of it by reading the newspaper to see that our society does not work.
Yeah, perhaps we can go into in just a moment how the social reality affects our personal reality. I'm talking with Werner Erhard. I'm talking with Werner Erhard, the creator of EST, and I should also mention the force and creator behind the Hunger Project, which we'll probably talk about a little later. Werner, just in that last moment we were finishing up there, just as you were saying, the social forces that are operating in the world, and it just occurs to me how much our lives are run by the social forces of the world and the social reality and that mediated reality, the reality that comes through the media. And we just sort of take that for granted, that that's what the world's like, what we see on channel whatever at 6 o'clock, and that's the way the world is. And you and I both know that, at least in my experience, and I'm sure in yours, that the world that we experience doesn't often match up with what we read about in Time or Newsweek or see on the television.
It was very much my experience that in order to make any difference in life, you really must learn to think for yourself. And we're really not taught to think for ourselves. We're told that we're taught to think for ourselves. But as I observe it, what happens is this. You get a particular bureau of drawers, in which you're allowed to think. And you start off thinking in the top drawer, and you run through that drawer of possible thoughts, and you feel wonderful because you've mastered that drawer of possible thoughts. And then you move to the next drawer of possible thoughts, and that's even greater because you're at a new level of thinking or intelligence or whatever you'd like to call it. But the real secret is, can you create your own bureau in which to think? People confuse the power of intellect with, they have a confusion between the mere stringing together of thoughts and the ability to create spaces in which to think. So thinking for oneself is not what you think, but what you can think. Einstein ushered in the age in science of the unseeable, the world outside the sensorium. And most of the technical advances and achievements, part of that I'll put in quotes, but what's happened to us materially, and that which has most affected our lives in the last 50 years has been in the realm of the unseeable, the realm of the unfeelable, the untouchable, the unhearable, the untastable, the unsmellable. It's been work done outside the sensorium. So we're now working in the realm of the unseeable. In order to think for oneself, one needs to be able to think the unthinkable. And we're really not trained for that at all. As a matter of fact, the organs, the muscles that we use to think with, are a totally different set of muscles than the muscle one must use in order to make spaces or contexts in which to think. And not only aren't we trained for that, but we're not even told that there is such a realm. And as a matter of fact, the social network, the acculturization, the social pea soup that we live in, makes it almost impossible to even bring the subject up. I was amazed to have been quoted on a television show recently, and I have to paraphrase myself because I don't have the quote, but it was I was talking about not knowing. I was talking about if you could struggle your way into not knowing, an experience that you didn't know, you were then in that place in which you could know. And it was quoted on this television show as an example of gibberish. And in fact, it was gibberish. That is to say, given the reality in which the person was reading it, from which the person was reading it, it was in fact gibberish. This was a person who was not allowed, whose societal connections had not allowed them to even explore the validity of not knowing. And
I can think of I would feel comfortable guaranteeing a politician several million extra votes that he wouldn't otherwise get if he just said, I don't know.
That's true. Michael, you mentioned the media. I had just a remarkable meeting with a man by the name of Tarzi Vatachi, who is a journalist now working with the UN in media relations. And he's a Sri Lankan who was trained in London in journalism. He said he learned, I've forgotten the name of the London newspaper, but on one newspaper he learned to be an English gentleman. On the other newspaper he learned to be a journalist. And he said that one of the unfortunate barriers that the media works with is, at least the popular media, is only allowed to report on events. And what he said was that the truly important things today are processes rather than events. And one of the things that that this format, which you've put together, really affords one, and I have to think back to the shows that I've done with you earlier and realize that I am sharing with you my process and the process that I'm observing and participating in, as I know you've given that opportunity to many other people. And I'd like to tell you where the process has brought me. Where the process has brought me is to see that we live in a world in which the rules for living successfully have changed. They changed sometime around now. And I say sometime around now because I can't pinpoint it. It may have been yesterday or 5 years ago or 50 years ago. But sometime around now, the rules for living successfully on this planet changed. The rules used to be based on you or me. The rules for living successfully on this planet now are based on you and me. The problem is that even those of us who are privileged and fortunate enough to recognize the shift in the basis for the rules, even those of us who are fortunate enough to recognize the shift aren't very able at the new rules. We literally have a responsibility to discover what these rules are.
There may be another add-on to that you and me, and that could be or no one.
Well, very good. And now, Michael, I have a thing that I really want to share with you about that, something I'm very excited about. I've been looking at that and have had the opportunity to talk to people like Dana Meadows, who wrote The Limits to Growth, along with a couple of other people, and Bucky Fuller, who, as you know, has been mapping trends for something a little over 50 years now, and people who kind of are taking a look at where it's all going. And I have come to the conclusion that while there's a possibility that we will wind up in a doomsday, that the probability of that is very small. What is much more likely to happen is that it will continue on like it is. And maybe that's a lot worse than a doomsday. See, I think that the real options presented to us, and there really is an option presented to us at this moment, and I want to talk to you about that. The option is to break through or to continue on in this petty pace day by day. That the option is not make it or break it. I think that's very unlikely. What is much more likely is that it will continue on in this petty pace if we don't take advantage of the opportunity in front of us. It may have been for many ages that there was no opportunity for a breakthrough, that literally we needed to evolve through the line, the linear kind of evolvement. But it's clear to me, and I want to share with you some of the things which I've seen, perhaps really to kind of discuss some of the things, because I know you see them and that other people see them, about this opportunity. For the first time, we have the opportunity to make the world work for all of us.
What does that mean?
Well, let me put it on a very materialistic basis in the first place, Michael, because I think it's easier to understand from there, and then we can kind of go to where I think the truth really lies. But the facts are that for the first time, our technology, and it can be demonstrated by people whose profession it is to study these things, for the first time our technology is such that we now have enough to go around for everybody. We literally have, for instance, enough food to feed everybody on this planet. And I don't mean enough food to feed everybody on this planet if we take food from those who have abundance of food, but enough food at this time to feed everybody on this planet without taking anything from those who have an abundance of food. Perhaps those of us who have an abundance and are wasting it, part of it would be to stop wasting it. Part of it would be to utilize it more effectively. But there is, in fact, enough food to feed everybody on the planet. Yet, as you and I both know, every minute that we sit here, 21 children die as a consequence of being malnourished. So you're left with the question, why? I mean, why, if there's enough food to go around, why, if there's enough food to feed everybody, would 15 million people die every year as a consequence of being malnourished? Well, the answer has got to be that we simply don't recognize the opportunity. No one of us would allow the world not to work for so many of us. No one of us who had the privilege of opportunity that we share could, and I know this to be a fact, and I'll demonstrate it in a moment, could possibly allow life not to work for so many if we knew we could do something about it. I said I would demonstrate it, Michael. I have worked in prisons, and I've worked in executive suites. I've worked with professionals in hospitals, and I've worked with teenagers. I've had the opportunity to work with lots of different kinds of people. I don't know anybody who I've ever worked with, who I've ever known, who, if you said to them, look, here is an opportunity to end hunger on this planet, and if that were real to them, I don't know any convict, I don't know any criminal, I don't know any executive, I don't know any professional, I don't know any artist, I don't know anybody who would not adjust their lifestyle to take advantage of the opportunity to make that kind of a contribution. I told you that my observation is that we're facing an incredible opportunity, an opportunity to make the world work for all of us. And that fits so perfectly with my deepest experience of people, in that it has been my experience that people want to make a difference. They want to have counted. They want to have contributed. And the evil in the world, and the waste in the world, and the frivolity in the world is really a function, not of people's pettiness, weakness, not of people's evil, but merely is a function of their not experiencing that they can count, that they can make a difference. I'll give you an exact example. I want to share a story with you of a man from San Quentin with whom we had an interaction. And his name is Froggy. And Froggy was in San Quentin for life without chance of parole. And he really regained a sense of himself. He's now, by the way, in a much less tight security prison in the middle of California, the name of which escapes me for the moment. But the point is this.
Folsom, maybe. Or no.
It's
Chino.
a federal prison. Lompoc, exactly. Right. Thank you. I should know it. I worked in there.
Yeah, the reason I know it is I went in there a couple of times. So
yes. Well,
to visit.
Froggy was interviewed in a motion picture, and I watched him, and he was really getting down to it, and he was sharing that he'd, as a function of really becoming a useful citizen inside the prison, his circumstances had improved, and he was being considered for parole. He said that if he knew that he could turn the quality of life for people in prison around, that he would refuse the parole, that he would literally give up the freedom which he'd worked incredibly to attain, which had to fill his whole consciousness. And it's really a demonstration of the point that I'm making, that what puts people up to mischief, what takes the joy out of life, what makes the world not work, is that we don't experience that we count, that we make a difference. You know, I suppose any fool can look at people in the United States and see that really what's wrong with us is we have no sense of purpose. Our lives are really without meaning. And even those of us who feel like we're making a contribution, like we have that gift of being able to contribute, Michael, when we look at it and take a real honest look and stand back, I know I have doubts about whether it really makes a difference. I know I've made a contribution, and I know people have valued from it, but does it really make a difference? I want to tell you another story. I was racing at Watkins Glen. It was in the beginning of the season. We raced there twice, and it was at the beginning of the season in the spring, and I was walking on the mountainside over the lake at Watkins Glen in upstate New York, talking with one of the people with whom I traveled, Bill Clements. And I was talking to Bill, and I said, I was trying to work my way through this thing, and I said to Bill that I had come up with a discovery, and my discovery was that there was a basic principle in people's lives, and that their lives were literally molded and limited by their basic principle. Like some people had a basic principle. Their basic principle in life was be careful. So it didn't make any difference where they were in life, what their circumstances were, what the forces working on them were. They were in a box, and they had to live in a box called be careful. Some people live in a box, don't let anybody get in front of you. And it's not that they think, it's not that they go around thinking don't let anybody get in front of you. It's that all of their behavior, all of their thinking, all of their feeling, all of their living cannot go beyond the boundaries of the box, don't let anybody get in front of you. And literally, you can actually look at yourself if you do it, after a little while, you can kind of see what the basic principle of your life is. A lot of people have a basic principle of be liked, be approved of. I must have your approval. And their whole life, and they can be incredibly able, capable, contributing, useful human beings. But still you see that they live and their lives are shaped by this principle, I must have your approval. Another very common one, by the way, is don't let anybody know you've been conned. People don't mind being conned. As a matter of fact, we all go to things that we know are kind of tricks, magic. But make sure that nobody thinks you've been conned. So that's another basic principle. At any rate, I was telling Bill, it was very clear to me that I had an opportunity and the privilege of literally being able to create my own basic principle. And the fact of the matter is that each of us does, once we get in touch with the fact that we do have a basic principle which shapes our lives, and start to get in touch with what it is. What I said to Bill, Michael, was this. I said, if I could be sure that it was really possible to create, if I knew it was really possible to achieve a transformation of life, not just make a contribution, not just make things a bit better, but if I knew that we really had the opportunity to transform life so that life was a process of enlightenment, so that life was a process of aliveness, so that life was a process of joy, of self-expression. If I was really sure about that, then I would know exactly what my life principle should be. And it's interesting because that got documented. The camera crew would follow us around wherever we went, in some very embarrassing places as well. But at any rate, and I got a chance to look at that again, and I realized that what I had said was entirely stupid. Because what I was saying, Michael, was I was dealing with what's going to be the context for my life. Not what's going to be the principle of my life, but what is going to be the context. The principles of life shape life. They mold it. They form it. The context for one's life simply opens up an opportunity. It doesn't shape it at all. It creates space rather than form. And I realized that I was dealing with a context, and what I was trying to do was to get some proof about the validity of a context. And it's like truth. There is no proof for it. One can only be responsible for it. One can know it and can't repeat it, and I know that's been said many times here, so I don't want to get into that. But I want to share with you that I realized that I had the power to create for my life a context, and that only I had that power. And that I was standing in front of an opportunity to create for my life the context that life could work for every one of us. And that was a great privilege and a great opportunity. And within the context of life working for all of us, it was possible to create for myself the principle that I made a difference. Not to prove that I made a difference, not to accumulate evidence, but to be able to live out of the responsibility for having made a difference, for making a difference. So that was kind of the beginning of the generation of this communication, this what one needs to be in touch with within oneself in order to take advantage of the opportunity that we've got to make the world work for all of us. So there's a context which is that the world can work for every one of us. We can prove it on a materialistic basis. We can prove it on a technological basis. We can prove it on a physical basis. But I'm really talking about something much greater than that. I'm talking about working in terms of being fulfilled, in terms of being totally useful, having the sense that one has been used, to quote George Bernard Shaw, that one has been used for a purpose considered by oneself a mighty one. And my realization was that each one of us has the power to create a context for our own lives. That each one of us has the power to make space in our lives. And that context, which gives us the wherewithal to have our lives make a difference. See, in any other context, your life cannot make a difference. It isn't possible that your life is going to make a difference. And those of us who have struggled to try to make a contribution, to make a difference, know that no matter how sincere you are, no matter how hard you struggle, there are those times when you look back at what you've accomplished and you have to say, gee, it really didn't make any difference. But in the context of a world that works for everyone, if you can create that context for yourself, you immediately are empowered to make the principle of your life that you count, that who you are counts, that the decisions you make about your life actually make a difference. And in that context, they do. And the other leg of that tripod, which gives it its stability, is to discover the rules for living successfully in a you and me world. And in discovering those rules for living successfully in a you and me world, in doing the work, and struggling to find out what it takes to make it, to be successful, to live viably in a you and me world, you do begin to express the principle that you make a difference, and you begin to manifest the context of a world that works for everyone.
I'm talking with Werner Erhard, and as you were talking, Werner, a saying that we have on the wall here kept coming up for me, and I think it encapsulates much of what you were saying. And the saying is from Lao Tzu, and the quote is, "Knowing that nothing needs to be done is where we begin to move from."
Yes, I have seen that statement, that particular statement, and statements like it, very badly misunderstood, because without a bit of insight, or in attempting to use that truth as a rule, you ruin its truth value. Let me tell you exactly what I mean. Some people, on hearing that, want then to believe it and use it as a rule of life. And what they then do is to lie down in front of the television and stop.
Right. Nothing needs to be done.
Yes, which is, of course, an entirely erroneous understanding of what's being said.
Yeah, I think that sayings like that involve both the head and the heart. They're said with both the head and the heart, and if we only hear them with the head, we don't get them.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And, or if you try to turn them into a justification, Michael, it's like, well, if it's all set, then I don't have to do anything. I'm going to go to the beach. First off, to do nothing does not mean to lie down and get into a fetal position. Literally, to do nothing means to do exactly what you're doing. That is the way to do nothing. If you do what you're not doing, that's doing something. If you stop doing what you're doing, that's doing something. But to do exactly what you're doing, and it's the kind of, it is a tautology whose total value, whose total sum is zero. And that's the nature of doing nothing. The nature of doing nothing is to do exactly what you're doing. I remember a talk I once gave at the Masonic Auditorium. I was one of the speakers in a day-long group of speakers, and I spoke about that exact fact, about the fact that this is all of it realizing itself. There's nothing to do. I mean, it is, in fact, realizing itself. And I spoke at some length about that simple statement. And what I failed to say at that time, and what I realize is useful to know, is that fulfillment is, in fact, that is to say, it is whole, it is complete, and at the same time, there's the opportunity to achieve it, to realize it, to be responsible for it, literally to create it. So that the fact that it's complete is one side of my hand, and the opportunity to create it is the other side of my hand. It is only because it is complete, because it's all there, because it's whole, because it's full, that you and I have the opportunity to create it. If it were halfway or going in the wrong direction, then we would have to do something. We would have to do what it wasn't doing. To do what something isn't doing is merely to change it. To do what it is doing is to create it.
So we don't start to drive the race with the intention of winning the race, but rather with the intention of experiencing the race. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, I am, Michael. But here's the problem I have. The problem I have with Lao Tzu's statement is that it's a true statement. And true statements are different than factual statements. Factual statements have value. That is to say, they're worth something. That is to say, with a statement of fact, you can say, therefore, I say, you are on the other side of the table from me. Therefore, in order to reach you, I have to walk around the table. Statement of fact, and it's useful. It lets me know what to do. All people are basically good. Therefore, I can organize my life so as to trust people. Fine. It's a rule, principle. But the truth has no value. That it's full, that it's complete. There's no therefore behind it. If you put a therefore behind it, you have demeaned its truth value and turned it into a principle or a rule or a rationalization or a justification or an explanation.
So you can't define the truth.
Precisely. Well, the point is that the truth doesn't explain anything, it doesn't justify anything, it doesn't rationalize anything. The truth is not to be used. The truth is a place to come from, not something to justify yourself with. As a matter of fact, it is the same in nature as a context. Context and truth are interchangeable for me. A context is an opportunity in which to be. Itself, it has no form, no expression. Context has no form or expression. It allows form and expression.
I think we have a very good example of what you're talking about, where truth is not just being there, but is being defined and is being identified and is creating positions, and that is the crisis with Iran and America. It's a perfect example.
Absolutely. And it goes back, Michael, to the thing we spoke about at the very beginning of the program, and that is in the ability to think for yourself. See, you and I have been very highly trained to explain ourselves. You and I have been very highly trained by our culture to rationalize ourselves. As you know, in Zen, they say those who know don't tell. What is meant by that is that at the level of truth, you cannot explain yourself, therefore you do not explain yourself. You cannot justify yourself, therefore you do not justify yourself. In Zen, they say those who know don't tell, and they say those who tell don't know. And as all that means for me is that when you are in the mode of explaining, when you're in the mode of justifying, when you're in the mode of rationalizing, you are not in the mode of truth. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because in order to get to the other side of the table, I got to be in the mode of facts. So it's all right for me to be in the mode of facts when that's appropriate. But it's also appropriate, so My life cannot have meaning, true meaning, cannot have purpose, true purpose. My life cannot be fulfilled until I have taught myself the way of the truth, the rules of the truth, and the fundamental rules of the truth, the fundamental rules of the context for living, the fundamental rules of the space of living, is that they don't justify anything, they don't explain anything, they don't tell you what to do. They leave you on your own, but they leave you on your own empowered with the space to be.
Let me just say, this is KALW FM in San Francisco. So, Werner, there aren't any answers.
Exactly. One is responsible. One is left on one's own 2 feet. You know, lots of people have talked about taking that step into the unknown. Well, I don't know. The step into the unknown is really much less courageous than a step from the unknown. See, if you're on solid ground and you take a step off, that's not so bad. But if you're in no place and move into some place, if you are coming from the truth into our society, into our dilemma, into our problem, if you can come from that which you cannot explain, that which does not justify your behavior in our society, but that which empowers you to come into the society, into your life, into the expression, into the form, that's what takes real courage, Michael. It takes no courage to step into the unknown. Might take a little risk-taking, kind of cheap thrills kind of thing, perhaps. The real courage is to come from that which you can't justify, but which empowers you. To come from that which does not give you any therefore I shall do this. To come from that which gives you the freedom to be, and it leaves you wholly responsible for what you do. It leaves you wholly responsible for how you express yourself. It gives you no justification. You are standing on your own 2 feet. That's what I was talking about when I said that what we lack often is the ability to think for ourselves.
So the real courageous people are those who come down off the mountaintop and come into the valley and enter the world of life.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very clear, and obviously what you said is thousands of years old, and what I've been saying is thousands of years old. And it must be created in order to be useful to us. Actually, I better keep my words consistent. In order to be empowering to us, not useful, but in order to be empowering to us, we must create it for ourselves. And that's another rule about the truth or context. The truth is there, but you cannot know it by figuring it out. The truth, while it is there, must be created. One does not figure out the truth, as you know. One creates the truth. And that's why, as I said before, we were talking, why not knowing is the step before knowing. Because you need nothing in order to create. If you've got something, you can only change it. If you've got nothing, if you've got space, if you've got opportunity, if you've got no form but potential, then you can create. So one comes from nothing to know the truth, to create the truth. And context is exactly the same way, Michael. So that whether this planet can be a place of natural working, whether life can work for everyone on this planet, is really, truly up to each one of us. And it is only in ourselves, not in our personalities, but in ourselves, that we have the power to create this context, that we have the power to create this truth. So I am empowered. You are empowered. Each of us is empowered to create a context for our own life. If it gets proven to you, that isn't it. If it gets explained to you in a way that you can buy it, that isn't it. If you believe it, that isn't it. If it's propped up from the outside, that isn't it. But the privilege and the opportunity is to be able to create this context of a world that works for everyone. And in that context, it's possible, in fact, one does make a difference. Who one is makes a difference. And to live your life to have your life shaped by the principle, who I am makes a difference. Not the belief, Michael, not trying to prove that you make a difference, but out of the principle that you make a difference, that literally who you are makes a difference. Helen Keller has this great statement, and I really love that it comes from Helen Keller, because as we all know, Helen Keller was both blind and deaf and mute. Helen said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And unfortunately, for most of us, it's nothing. And in a context of a world that works for everyone, and living life out of a principle that each of us makes a difference, life becomes a daring adventure. It's now, the way you vote is now important. The choices you make when you wake up in the morning is now important. What you do with each moment of your life counts. And to live successfully in such a context, you need to find the rules for living successfully in a you and me world. Like I said, it's changed. It used to be that there wasn't enough to go around. In order to live successfully, you needed to know what the rules were in a you or me world. And part of the rules in a you or me world was if I got enough, I gave some to you. But I never gave to you the power that I had to get it.
You or me world is also I get mine first.
Oh, absolutely.
Then you can have yours.
Yes. And there's, of course, a justification. The justification is, if I don't get mine first, I can't give it to you. And if I do get mine first, I can give it to you. Maybe that worked at some time. I guess maybe it did. It got us to here. But the rules for living successfully have really changed. We cannot, you as an individual, me as an individual, us as a city, this country, etc., we can't make it if we continue to try to make it on rules in a world that's changed on us.
I'm talking with Werner Erhard, and we're talking about, I don't know what we're talking about, but it sounds interesting to me. And one of the things that occurs to me as I'm listening to you, Werner, is that, and I think I mentioned this before, that there aren't any answers, there aren't any solutions, and throughout our life we're trained that there is an answer, there is a solution, there is something to do from when we start in school to when we finish and when we go out in the world. This is the way you do it. And part of realizing, I think, what you're talking about is realizing that there are lots of ways to look at the same thing. There are lots of ways to experience it. And in our society especially, one of the assumptions we operate under is that everybody thinks alike, that somehow if the same stimulus is presented, everybody will act in a certain way. So things like Nielsen ratings and Gallup polls and all of that tend to cement that, tend to support that idea, when in fact there are lots of ways of looking at things, and it's opening ourselves up to that possibility that you're talking about.
Yes, that's really very beautiful. I think about programs of education, and I'm thinking programs in the media, some of which are even very, very, very well done, which leave people with the sense, I see, that's the way it is. When, in fact, what would empower them is to be left with the sense, I can see various ways of looking at how it is. In other words, to empower the person to create a vision for themselves rather than leaving them with a picture. Now, there's a really great thought in the book The Medusa and the Snail, written by Dr. Lewis Thomas. He also wrote
Lives of a Cell.
Exactly, which is, of course, another great book. But he says, for in real life, this is the way we've always arrived at decisions, even though it's always been done in a disorganized way. We pass the word around. We ponder how the case is put by different people. We read the poetry. We meditate over the literature. We play the music. We change our minds. We reach an understanding. Society evolves this way, not by shouting each other down, but by the unique capacity of unique individual human beings to comprehend each other. I think he was talking about the same thing. And
he wasn't talking about the oil companies.
I'm afraid not. What we were talking about, Michael, and I wanted to stick with it for just a second, was a context in which people's lives could matter, in which people could make a difference. And if one looks for oneself, one can see that in any other context, in a you or me context, nothing works. I mean, it's just a fact. It's like trying to play basketball when you think you're playing football. In other words, you're the only guy on the court playing football rules. Everybody else is playing basketball. You're probably not going to be very effective. As a matter of fact, the game would probably, at least in your part of the court, the description of the game in your part of the court would look like our daily newspaper looks. And I think our daily newspaper looks like that because we're really playing by the wrong rules. Like I said, all of us have become very capable and able at playing. We know the rules in a you or me world. You and me world, the rules have shifted. And one of the rules for being effective in a you and me world is that you need to learn what the Buddhists call skillful means, what Bucky Fuller calls trim tabbing. And that is to say, you need to know how to influence the direction of the rudder. To paraphrase Bucky, you need to learn how to influence the direction of the rudder with a very small force. Even though a great force is required to turn the ship, the trim tab at the end of the rudder, just with a little application of energy, you can move the great rudder, which moves the great ship of state, as Bucky says it. And for me, what trim tabbing is, what the skillful means are, is, and the first rule of living successfully in a you and me world is that it is your responsibility to discover what is needed and wanted. Now, most of us don't, that is not the question on our mind. The question on our mind is, what do I want to do? What'll look good? What'll work for me? How do I make the thing that I wanted to have happen? What's the first step in realizing my dreams? In a you and me world, skillful means, trim tabbing, being effective, really comes down to developing a capacity to discovering what's needed and wanted. Now, of course, naively, one will start off by asking. It's almost always ineffective because people haven't really trained themselves or educated themselves in the area of what's needed and wanted. For instance, if you ask people what's needed and wanted over television, most of what they're going to talk to you about isn't what they really want. It's simply a reflection of a kind of meaninglessness, purposelessness, and the need to be diverted from a life without fulfillment, without meaning. But if you make it your business, if you take it on to train yourself, to really have a commitment to discovering what's needed and wanted. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is when you go home or at home, you turn around and you look at the person you live with and you say, what's needed and wanted? You go to the place where you work and you look at the people there and what's going on there and you say, what's needed and wanted? And you develop the skill to discover what is needed and wanted. And that's one of the rules, that is perhaps one of the basic rules for living successfully in a you and me world, is to have a real commitment to discovering what is needed and wanted, and then obviously to produce it.
In a you and me world, can you have all that you want?
I have to tell you, Michael, that the whole issue of what one wants is actually, in truth, irrelevant. And I think that most of us who've had the opportunity to get at least some of what we want come to know that. You know, I used to think, gee, if I could have that, then I'd be happy. Or if I could do that, then I'd be happy. Or if I could achieve that level, then that would be it. It's nonsense. One is responsible for one's own happiness. Getting what you want isn't going to make you happy. Getting what you want isn't going to make you anything. I just did B.B. Anderson, who's a really very great Swedish actress, been in many Ingmar Bergman films, is making a documentary to take back to Sweden because she thinks that people in Sweden should be supported in being perhaps more open, more flexible. She said to me, look, Werner, the people in Sweden have the highest degree of security perhaps in the whole world. There's a 2% unemployment rate. There's an absolute welfare system. And yet the big fear in Sweden is a loss of security. And it's, getting what you want isn't going to make you secure. The job is to be secure from nothing. You bring security to life. You don't get security out of life. You bring happiness to life. You don't get happiness out of life. And this, of course, is the insanity of our society, in which the big question is, what do you want? It's in terms of satisfaction, in terms of purpose, in terms of meaning, in terms of living a whole life, in terms of making any difference in life. The answer to the question, what do you want, is wholly irrelevant, and what's worse, it's a big smokescreen.
It permeates our society. I mean, it goes back to the Dale Carnegie School. You can have exactly what you want in the world. And then if you look at what's called the New Age, frequently what comes out of that is that you can have anything you want. You create your own reality. You can get it all. You can have it all. And if you don't think you can, something's wrong with you.
Well, Michael, I think you've really hit on something very important, particularly at this time of the century. And that is that there was this whole great conversation about the last decade as the me decade. And I would have to tell you that my understanding, my observation of the decade is that, in fact, for many people it was a me decade.
It's a good example of a media-created reality, too, because it came out of two articles, one by Peter Marin and one by Thomas Wolfe.
Exactly. But this really is very useful. And I think both of them reflected their own experience and their own observation and their own circle of experience. What they were reflecting was the limit of their circle of experience. And it is true that in the last decade, much of the fervor and the social responsibility shifted to a kind of introspective, but let me tell you why it shifted, at least in my observation, in my experience, in my circle of experience. The shift came because people did not experience that they could make a difference. And if they couldn't make a difference, then by God, they were going to be comfortable. By the same token, what was not reported on by Wolfe, what was not reported on by Marin, what they failed to notice was that there was a distinction between those people who were merely interested in comfort because they had been robbed of the sense that they made a difference. There was a distinction between those people and people who were working on themselves. I have another quote which I want to read to you from The Medusa and the Snail, from Dr. Thomas, because I think it epitomizes this distinction, which I feel that Wolfe and Marin did not acknowledge, perhaps didn't notice, certainly didn't acknowledge, and which the repeat of it obviously couldn't acknowledge. He says, "This is surely the driving idea behind democracy, and it is astonishing that the system works at all, let alone well. The individual is the real human treasure, and only when he has become cultivated to full expression of his selfness can he become full value to society. Like many attractive social ideas, it is authentic, ancient Chinese. Integrity is the most personal of qualities. Groups and societies cannot possess it until single mortals have it in hand. It is hard work for civilization. And Michael, I want to perhaps even complete what I have to say, not necessarily end it because I know we have some time to go, but really complete what I have to say to tell you that these three dimensions which create dimensionality for me, this dimension of a context of a world that works for all of us, the other dimension of a principle of life that who you are counts, and finally the rules for living successfully in a changed world, a you and me world, really comes out of my experience of the people with whom I've worked and lived, the people with whom I've shared, the people who've shared their lives with me, the people who have really been working on themselves. But the distinction is that they have not merely worked on themselves as a personality. They haven't merely worked on themselves as an ego. They have worked on that self in which the misidentification as an object is broken down and an expanded sense of self as space, so that one no longer identifies oneself as this thing over there, over here, and you are that thing over there, but you are the space in which that thing and this thing occur. I am the space in which that thing and this thing occur. We are literally one, not the same thing. Something much broader than the same thing. Out of that sense of self, in a you and me world, what does the word selfishness mean? In a you and me world, what does the word altruism mean? Neither one of those words has any meaning at all. It's only when you haven't got what the game is, when you still think it's you or me, when you still think there's not enough to go around, when you still think that some have to make it and some can't make it, when you still think that the game is one in which some win and some lose, when you don't get it, then those words have great impact. But in a world of you and me, there is no such thing as selfishness. There is no such thing as altruism.
Werner, one of the things that you've talked a lot about, and perhaps I can get you to talk a little bit about it here, because I think it relates to what you've been talking about up to now, and that is you've used the word responsibility a lot, and taking responsibility. And I think that's been much misunderstood in how you've tried to use it and by people who have heard it. I want to give you this opportunity to clear it up.
That's great, Michael, and I really appreciate it as an opportunity because it is something which is, of course, very badly misunderstood. And one of the, as Wittgenstein says about that, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Well, I have violated that dictum. I've spoken about that which one cannot speak. And the price you pay for that is to be misunderstood. As a matter of fact, William James, who also spoke about those kinds of things, said that if you discover something, it will at first be thought to be gobbledygook. It won't seem to make any sense. And then it's in its second phase, it will be seen as being simple and obvious. And in its final stage, it will come back to you through the mouth of others. And what I'm simply saying to you, Michael, is that I have no problem with being misunderstood. I see it as part of the heat. And like
you're willing to stay in the kitchen.
That's it, exactly. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to clear it up. And I find, interestingly enough, Michael, that many of the things about which many of us were understood not more than 5 years ago, people are starting to get in a very kind of, obvious way. So this business about responsibility, let me say some of the things that it isn't first. One of the things is that you can't make anybody responsible. Responsibility and force never go together. They're not the same thing. That is to say, at least the phenomena which I'm talking about when I use the word responsibility is not something that can be placed on you, forced on you. Responsibility is rather a kind of a privilege and an opportunity. And in its ultimate sense, it is the knowledge that you are cause in the matter. Not that you did it, That's different. That's that you constructed it. That is not responsibility. Responsibility, at least, again, as the phenomena which I wish to describe when I use the word responsibility, is not that you did it or that you made it happen, but that you were the cause in the matter, that you are responsible for it, not as a burden. Responsibility is never burden. Responsibility is never obligation. It is truly freedom. It is the power to be with respect to this matter, not the power to do, but the power to be with respect to this matter.
Doesn't real responsibility involve giving up taking credit for it?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the rules for having the world work for everyone is that it's an all or nothing at all game. You have to play for the ultimate monument. You can't play for any small monuments. No buildings, no books, none of that. The only monument in that endeavor, in having the world work for all of us, is that the world does work for all of us. And at that point, credit obviously disappears in a world of people who make a difference, in a world where the world does work for all of us. And as you say, responsibility has nothing to do with credit. It's often, or blame. And that's the bigger problem usually, that people mistake responsibility for guilt. That you are responsible isn't related to the issue of whether you're guilty. Guilty is another system. Responsibility is at the level of truth, at the level of being, not at the level of concept or circumstances or explanations or justifications. One is privileged to be responsible. One is not burdened with responsibility. And the point, Michael, is this, that if you can know yourself as cause in the matter, you have shifted yourself from the victim of this, even if it's something very bad. See, I have been responsible for lots of very bad things. I've been to blame for them too. But when I could get beyond the guilt, when I could get beyond the blame, when I could come to own them, come to recognize myself as cause in the matter, I then empowered myself to correct the errors. So that if the way things are is not my responsibility, then I am a victim. If the way things are is my responsibility, then I am privileged to be able to work with them, to be able to correct them, to be able to make them work. So that's the true nature of responsibility. And unfortunately, people have gone around and said, you are responsible for this, and that means you're at cause, and that means you're to blame, and that was the overtone. You see, you can't fix responsibility. You can fix blame, you can fix guilt, but you can't fix responsibility. Only I can create myself as responsible. Only you can create yourself as responsible. I cannot point out to you that you're I can't force you to be responsible. I may create the opportunity for you to take a look at it and choose on your own to know that you're responsible. Or you might behave with me in such a way that you're kind of giving me a poke in the ribs, and I say, oh, yeah, I can be responsible in this matter. I can own this matter. I can acknowledge myself as cause in this matter. The other thing is you can't even force responsibility on yourself. If you sit down to figure out whether you did it, that is not responsibility. That's a construction and an argument. And responsibility has nothing to do with constructions and arguments. Responsibility has to do with the courageous, self-determined choice to know one's self as cause in the matter. Even if someone else did it. Even if the forces did it. Even if they did it. You can know yourself as cause in the matter. And so that's really what is meant by responsibility. It's an act of being. And it's a courageous act of being. And it's nothing that you can force on anybody. You can't even force it on yourself. You can't be responsible at effect, because responsibility is literally cause.
One of the things that occurs to me, Werner, is that you have been blamed a lot, and you've been attacked, in some cases unmercifully, for some of the things that you've done, particularly in the media. And one of the things that you did was you created the Hunger Project, and you've been attacked for creating the Hunger Project as a way to generate S trainees, and You've been attacked because, well, what is he doing auto racing when the money for auto racing could go into the Hunger Project and eliminate hunger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're a perfect example of someone who has to deal with that kind of really merciless attack in your life. And I'm wondering how you personally deal with that, how you handle that, and because I think it's useful for others.
Well, I have gotten so much out of it, Michael, and found it so useful that I'd literally like to, with the skilled interviewer, examine the whole area over quite a period of time, because I'd like to get really down deep inside of it and really see what I have learned or what I can learn. But let me just describe a little bit of the facts of it, at least, although I may not be able to get to the truth of it yet. The fact of the matter is that in the beginning, when it first started, I was absolutely startled by it. I mean, it did not occur to me that what I was doing was of any interest except to those people who wanted to find out about it to see if it was any value to them. That it would be the subject of any controversy was just an absolute surprise to me.
You're talking about the Hunger Project now.
I'm actually talking about S. I'm talking about all the way back.
Okay, right.
And just startled by it. And it was my view at the time, I now recognize mistakenly, that what I should do is to simply stay out of it. Let it be, so to speak. What that did was to give lots of people the idea that we were perhaps trying to hide or that we were being secretive, when in fact the truth of the matter is that, I mean, there isn't anything that we do that isn't known by literally thousands of people. And so I was really confused by it. I was really befuddled by it for a while, Michael. And I really now have come to see that it's my responsibility to master it. Once having mastered it, perhaps I can make a contribution to making it a bit more useful. But there are two other shoots off of this, what I've said so far. One is the issue of public opinion. The other one is the issue of the Hunger Project and the example of it. What I wanted to say about public opinion, Michael, is that it is that phenomena in our society that is devoid of responsibility. I have my opinion. You have your opinion. Each listener has their opinion. And if 10 of us got together and we said, well, who should be the next president? Everybody's got an opinion. And, man, I'm be the first guy to tell you mine. And I have a pretty strongly held opinion, maybe. But if you said to me, okay, Werner, we don't want your opinion. We don't even care what you think. You are going to be the person who chooses the next president. First thing I would do is to shut my mouth, because I would know that I didn't have what it takes to make that choice. As long as it's just my opinion, Michael, it's devoid of responsibility. If I could learn and train myself to generate my opinions out of a sense of responsibility, rather than out of a sense that I don't make any difference, that I have no responsibility, my opinions would be shaped in a totally different way and might even be useful. At any rate, this phenomena of public opinion is a kind of collective. It's a mob psychology. It's a kind of mass psychology. It's the psychology of the justification, the psychology of the explanation. It's a psychology devoid of truth, of integrity, of honor, of dignity. And because we're so deeply embedded in it in our culture and society, our culture reflects those lacks as well. And one of the things that could really have an impact is this business about, if you come to know that you make a difference, if you come to know that you have an opportunity to make the world work for all of us, you want a different kind of information. You don't want information that allows you to have an opinion. You want information that allows you to be responsible. You don't want information that allows you to wow the boys. You want information that allows you to be effective. And so you begin to demand a different quality of information. And the media only reflects us, Michael, as you well know. The media gives us what we ask for. The media gives us what we'll pay for. The media gives us what we'll listen to, what we'll watch, what we'll buy. Now let me go off on the other shoot now. I don't know whether this is going to make a flower or a plant or just a bunch of stalks, but this is what I got. And that is about the Hunger Project. The Hunger Project really was formulated out of my experience of the literally hundreds of thousands of people with whom I've shared this very profound sense of self, this very profound transformation, this very profound experience. And my as I've said today so many times, my realization that what people really wanted was to make a difference, to make a contribution. And I began to look through the world to see why it didn't work, what the story was. And I was stopped from my investigation by the facts about hunger, the facts that I mentioned earlier, that every year, 15 million of us die as a consequence of hunger. And they don't have to. It's not, look, I could say so many millions die in traffic accidents. That may be the price of getting around quickly. But 15 million of us dying of starvation is not the price of anything. It's unnecessary. So I was stopped there. And I for 5 years I studied the problem. Literally for 5 years. I had a person in my office whose project it was to help me to educate myself. And I read piles of books and piles of papers and talked to people. And it was just a pea soup. I couldn't break through. And finally I had a breakthrough. And it was a very simple thing, like it usually is. And what I saw was that what was needed and wanted was a context, an environment, an atmosphere of a commitment to end hunger on the planet. That what we did to end hunger would not work, did not work, could not work. And we would not do what worked as long as the context was there's nothing we can do about it, or we're going to do our part, or this is the best we can do, or hunger's inevitable, or it keeps the population down, or the rest of those myths. So that what the purpose of the Hunger Project is to supply what all of the experts in the field of hunger and famine and starvation say is missing. And they say there's only one thing missing. It's not technology. It's not a breakthrough in science. These are there. It's not more agriculture. There's enough agriculture. There's enough food. It's not merely systems of distribution. What they say is missing is the will to end hunger. The total purpose of the Hunger Project is to supply a worldwide will, a worldwide commitment, a worldwide realization that the end of hunger is an idea whose time has come. Now, what goes along with that is that each individual can count, because the place to create the will, the place to create that commitment, the place to create the context, the end of hunger, as an idea whose time has come, is within one's self. And then to share that opportunity with others. That allows me to make a difference. My personal commitment makes a difference. Then, another part of the project, see, everybody thinks that if you haven't told people what to do, then you didn't tell them anything useful. You got to give people answers. And I loved what you said before about the true cheating that giving people answers is. What the Hunger Project asks people to do is out of their commitment, out of the context of the end of hunger, to decide for themselves, to work it out for themselves, what will you do that will be consistent with the end of hunger on the planet? Work it out for yourself. Okay, so the truth of the matter is that the media has been very supportive about it. There was one article in one place in which the Hunger Project was really very severely attacked. We feel that the attack was in fact totally unwarranted. I mean, the facts are that Est literally contributed the money, the energy, and the people to create the Hunger Project. There are 225,000 graduates of the Est training. There are 800,000 participants in the Hunger Project. So rather than the Hunger Project being an enrollment ground for the Est training, is truly the other way around. Est financed the Hunger Project. Now, the Hunger Project now has a life of its own. It's much larger than Est. It's independent from Est, but Est truly made the contribution to start it. But I have to tell you that there's another side to the story, and the other side to the story is that at least in the kind of society we've got now, I think it's really incumbent on some area of the media to take shots at everything. Because I think this is the way it works, Michael. I think that the way it works is you take a shot at something. If it's accurate, it sticks. If it's not accurate, it falls off. In the case of the Hunger Project, the shot that this particular periodical took at the Hunger Project has merely fallen off. Those things which have some legitimacy stick. Those things which are fully legitimate maybe pierce the heart. And no question about the fact that the media has protected lots of people from lots of nonsense. But in the process, there's plenty of heat. And if you want to make a difference in life, at least in this society, you need to be able to tolerate heat.
Right.
Goes with the territory.
Yes. We're talking with Werner. We were talking about the Hunger Project, and there was something else you wanted to say about the Hunger Project.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that obviously what will end hunger is what we do. The purpose of the Hunger Project is to create a context in which what we do can be effective. And there's a very good example in the situation in Cambodia. What was called for there was a very immediate and large, effective response by our government, which had not been forthcoming, for instance, in the situation in Nicaragua. What happened was that the Hunger Project, because of its support of all hunger projects, all hunger organizations, was able to effect a coalition of practically every hunger organization in the country. They elected Father Hesburgh and Jim Grant, who will be the new chairman of UNICEF, to be their spokespeople. They went to the president, but they were now a large enough voice to get the president to move swiftly and effectively so that our government had an intelligent and an effective response to the situation in Cambodia. In addition to which, we were able to provide advertisements to raise money for those few agencies which were being effective in Cambodia and who had been allowed in. And as a result of 10 full-page newspaper ads, which we put in the major newspapers around the country, other newspapers picked those ads up and ran them for free, and easily $500,000 was generated from those advertisements for those agencies by the Hunger Project, really out of a kind of spontaneous motion which the Hunger Project kind of started. Now, the truth of the matter is that we don't kind of go around wearing that on our sleeve, because our intention was to be effective and to make a contribution rather than to get some credit out of it. And I just must put this in, Michael, that I want to encourage people to take a look at what's going on in Cambodia, not as an isolated case that will be over in a couple of months, but something which will require our intelligent response over perhaps a few years, and in addition to which will require the kind of response that leads to a commitment to end hunger on the planet, so that situations like Cambodia, where an entire civilization was in jeopardy of being wiped out, simply don't happen.
Werner, we only have a few minutes left, and we're moving into probably what amounts to the most important decade civilization has ever faced. And perhaps in these final moments, I would like you to leave with our listeners what you think is the most important whatever that, as we move into this next decade, that we need to be with.
Yes, I would agree that it's the most important decade. It has to be, because it's the one we've got, if for no other reason. In addition to which, the larger sense of what this decade is about, the underlying sense and the overriding sense of what this decade is about, in my observation and in my experience of us, is an incredible opportunity. It's an opportunity not merely to do it better, not merely to do more, not even to do it different than we did it, but for a real breakthrough, to think thoughts we haven't thought, to create paradigms and contexts of living, models of living that weren't within our reach before. And the great opportunity and the really thrilling opportunity is that we can choose to make the success of all humanity our personal business, that we can choose to be audacious enough to take responsibility for the entire human family, that we can choose to make our love for the world what our lives are really about. Out of such choices will come the kind of purpose, meaning, and effectiveness that we need to make the world work for all of us.
Werner, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Michael. Truly my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome.